It's a grim endgame in northeast Syria. Daily killings, sometimes by the dozens, up to 500,000 displaced, as Russian-backed forces of Bashar al Assad intensify their offensive in the northwest against the last rebel-held province. The writing had long been on the wall after Bashar al Assad agreed to turn Idlib into, well, what some call a giant holding pen for besieged rebels from elsewhere. That was with the guarantee of Turkey, which back in 2018 reached a deal with Moscow to deploy to 12 observation posts, 2 of which now find themselves behind enemy lines. President Erdogan, seen here in happier times with his Russian counterpart, has retaliated sharply after a deadly exchange Monday between Turkish and Syrian government forces. Erdogan now warning Vladimir Putin to rein in his protege. So, is Idlib really the endgame of an uprising that became a civil war, the rise and fall of ISIS in Syria, and a Turkish offensive against the Kurds? Or merely the start of another dark chapter? It's with an eye to all those caught in the crossfire that will ask what the West now does, faced with the potential of yet another reversal of alliances. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the showdown over Idlib. Joining us, retired General Dominique Trinquant, former head of the French military mission to the United Nations. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening.
We want to welcome from Istanbul, Yusuf Farim, analyst and commentator for TRT World. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
From Moscow, Alexei Klebnikov. He is Middle East analyst at the Russian International Affairs Council. And we're joined here in the studio by Syrian photojournalist Firas Abdullah, whose images are on display in the town hall of Paris's 2nd arrondissement till the 20th of February. Your exhibit, Syria, Bear Witness at Any Price, I guess is how you would translate it into English. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks.
All right, we'll talk more about your experiences photographing, most notably, the siege of Ghouta in the suburbs of the capital, Damascus. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter. The hashtag here is F24debate. Let's begin with the latest. Turkey giving a fresh ultimatum to Syria to pull its forces back from its military post. This after the Assad government seized another 20 towns and villages in and around Idlib in the last 24 hours. Claire Rush has more on Syria's last rebel-held enclave.
In northwestern Syria, Idlib province is the last stronghold of the rebel groups that have sought to overthrow President Bashar al Assad for the past 9 years. Long a heartland of the opposition, Idlib has been controlled by a nebula of rival rebel factions since 2015. As Assad's forces have retaken territory throughout the country, they've often struck deals with opponents, allowing them to evacuate to Idlib on condition of surrender. This has turned the northwestern province into a sort of dumping ground for rebels and civilians from across Syria, the government essentially cornering its opposition in a province nestled against the Turkish border. Of Idlib's 3 million residents, a third are believed to have been displaced from elsewhere. In 2017, Idlib was declared one of the country's 4 de-escalation zones in an agreement reached by Turkey, Russia, and Iran. The following year, Ankara and Moscow joined forces again to broker a ceasefire for the province. But neither the de-escalation nor the ceasefire have held. In the meantime, Idlib has come to be dominated by one rebel group in particular, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. A jihadist alliance, including members of the former al-Nusra Front, which was linked to al-Qaeda. As HTS control has grown, Syrian forces have stepped up efforts to retake Idlib, launching a ground and air offensive with their Russian allies. An offensive that's intensified over the past year. Since December, hundreds of civilians have been killed, and more than 500,000 have been displaced, as one of the biggest upheavals in the 9-year war. But for many in Idlib, where a series of ceasefires have failed, there is nowhere left to flee. Neighboring Turkey, already home to more than 3 million Syrian refugees, is not opening its doors, compounding what the UN has called a dire humanitarian situation.
Yeah, Firas Abdallah, we saw those images of people on the road at the end of that report. According to the UN, we're now up to 520,000 displaced by this offensive. Have you had word from people you know in Idlib province?
Yeah, actually, the situation now in Idlib is, I can call it's catastrophic situation. There is over, as we heard now, there is over 500,000 people who displaced from south of Idlib. Not all of them are from Idlib, actually. We can say that Idlib now is a whole Syrian community, because there is people who displaced from Daria before, from Homs in 2013, from Daria 2016, Douma and Eastern Ghouta 2018, and from Aleppo 2016. So all Syrian people are in this area now, and they are being hit and by daily shelling, daily airstrikes by Russian air forces, by regime army against them. So there is nowhere to go. The only way, the only place.
So you were in Ghoutas. Forgive me for asking a blunt question here. Wasn't it obvious that this was going to happen? Why did people agree to go to Idlib?
Actually, there is no choice. If you are against the regime forces and you choose to stay, so you will be kidnapped, you will be arrested, you will be tortured until death. So there is no agreement with Assad. There is no agreement. Assad has no word to say. He just said that, okay, I give you guarantee, and there is no guarantee. It's just like the Russian guarantee. It's the same. So saying, okay, I will stay and I trust in Assad, there is no trust with Assad. There is no trust with what Russia said about guarantee safety.
All right. And Syria's military command saying Tuesday that the presence of Turkish forces was illegal and a flagrant act of aggression, vowing to respond to any Turkish attacks on its forces after that exchange on Monday of fire that left several dozen killed on both sides. The rebuttal, well, it came less than 24 hours later from Ankara.
For Turkey, the assault on our soldiers in Idlib is the onset of a new era in Syria. Any ground or air assault on our soldiers or on the friendly elements we're working with will meet retaliation in kind, regardless of its source. If the security of our soldiers in the Idlib region cannot be ensured, then nobody should raise an objection to us when we make use of our right to do this, personally.
General Trakal, since the safety of our soldiers in Idlib cannot be ensured, nobody can object to us exercising our right to do this. What does he mean?
First, I just go back to what you said. Of course, everything is planned. I think you can foresee what was happening because all the city were taken by fights, then negotiation. But the negotiation was to put people in Idlib. And we know that Bashar al Assad wanted to take Idlib. So in fact, this was, for 3 years now, it was piecemeal battles, and then everybody's in Idlib, and this is the last battle to take the whole territory for Bashar al Assad. And just remember also that initially Mr. Erdogan was against Bashar al Assad when this war started. He was against him. And so now...
And that never changed.
That's never changed. So it changed because there was an agreement with the Russian, and the Russian was supporting Bashar al-Assad. So in fact, the problem is now, who is cheating? Is the Russian and Bashar al-Assad, who had an agreement with the Turk, or the Turk, who have an agreement, but don't want to have all these refugees coming into Syria, into Turkey, sorry. But at the same time, you've got another theater of operation, which is Libya, and where Mr. Erdogan is using people coming from Idlib to Turkey and then use them in Libya. So in fact, he's using fighters in other parts because he doesn't want to have Turkish soldiers fighting on the front line. But here in Idlib, you've got fighters, Turkish soldiers, which are trapped in
these observation posts.
Yes, and in fact, it will not last long because he had the agreement was that, okay, will stand by on Idlib, but you've got to sort out the problem with the fighters in Idlib. And he was not able to sort out the problem in Idlib. So that's why what you said is that everything was predictable. We know that Idlib will be the last fight and it will not stop. And I'm really sorry for all the refugees and all the people who are there, but that's the end of the war in Syria.
Again, Yusuf Arim, we heard in that clip Turkey's president saying that any ground or air assault on our soldiers or on friendly elements we are working with will be retaliated in kind regardless of the source. That's a pointed threat to militias, I guess you could say the Syrians, the Russians. Nonetheless, what happens now to those Turkish soldiers in those posts that are encircled by pro-Assad forces?
Well, after President Erdogan's speech today, it seems very clear and very evident that the military mandate for Turkish troops stationed in Syria is now being revised and changed to allow for engagement between Turkish troops and regime soldiers. So this is very important because up till now, engagement with any type of regime troops is something that Turkey has shied away from and was off the table. And right now we can see that Turkey has already engaged regime troops before with counterstrikes after 8 Turkish soldiers were killed in an attack near Sarakip. And the Turkish military returned fire, hitting numerous regime targets and also the regime taking heavy losses from the defensive strike launched by Turkey. Now, when we look at these besieged observation posts, the ones that you're talking about are the ones in Morek and Surman. And also, as we were speaking just before the program started, there's news that Sarakip has fallen as well. There's another observation post very close to there as well. What's going to happen to these people? Well, President Erdogan also stated that these observation posts will remain regardless if they're inside regime territory. And the objective of these observation posts were to view and observe violations of agreements. So these observation posts were not meant to be areas of combat or house combatant troops. They were mainly just to examine and observe how the Sochi agreement was unfolding. Now, also looking forward, what's going to happen between the regime and Turkey? Well, as the regime continues marching north, we're looking at this action towards Sarakip. Why is that important? Well, that's very close to where the M4 highway, the highway that runs from west to east throughout Syria, and the M5 highway that runs from Aleppo all the way down to Damascus almost intersects. So it's a very strategic area for the regime that they want to take. Very important logistically, but it's also an area that Turkey does not want to give up. And it's also also allows the regime a logistical advantage in launching more offensives further north into civilian areas as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Turkey reacts with these with this new round of offensive coming from Assad's regime.
Alexei Klebnikov, you heard it there from Yusuf Arim. That north-south highway is, excuse the expression, a red line. Does this also put Turkey on a collision course now with Russia?
Well, in the first place, that was part of the initial Idlib deal of 2018. One of the provisions of that agreement was that by the end of 2018, M4 and M5 highways must be reopened for the traffic, which never happened. So basically, the initial Idlib deal of 2018, which was struck in Sochi by Putin Erdogan, envisaged that as well. So I don't think that's a kind of a red line for Turkey or something in a way. If also it's important to look back in recent weeks, and we can see easily that over the last 2-3 weeks, Syrian forces made quite a substantive advancement, not facing a lot of struggle from the opposition and the armed groups side, which previously was not the case. So it also some additional indication of that Turkey is kind of okay with the current offensive and with the current state of affairs. The only reason why Turkey is concerned is the pace of and the timing of this offensive, because it comes in very uncomfortable time when Turkey started to be involved more in Libya, and transferring more Syrian militants to Libya, and also.
But Alexei, it's also happening. It's also happening the week where there was that exchange of fire where Turkish soldiers were killed, and there was retaliation. Turkey is now exposed and on the front line. They've run out of real estate, and they're facing Assad's forces.
Well, that's always was the risk. That's always, Turkey and Syria, like Ankara and Damascus clearly saw that, and they clearly understand that. And I also want to underline that this escalation is between Turkey and Syrian government, not between Turkey and Russia. If we look closely at what Erdogan said yesterday, is that there was no reasons to divorce or deterioration of relations between Russia and Turkey, because there is certain strategic projects and initiatives run by Russia and Turkey, namely the nuclear power plant and the gas pipeline Turkish Stream and the rising trade over between the two countries. So there is a big economic foundation for the relations between the two countries, and Syria is not the reason to break that all. So basically that's to underline that regardless of what's happening, the two countries already had several agreements on Syria. And also, yesterday or 2 days ago, foreign ministers Çavuşoğlu and Lavrov, they confirmed the commitment to the initial 2018 Idlib deal, which means that both Turkey and Russia see, in general, eye to eye each other. And also, if you see, and coming back to the criticism, of mutual criticism, it's quite consistent and it's not new. What happened in the last week and the last days, in terms of the exchange of rhetoric, that happened over the last year and a half. So I don't think that is a big game changer in the current situation on the ground.
All right, General Tankon, we showed the map there a second ago of that Turk Stream pipeline. Even though Turkey's a NATO member, we've all been discussing how we're surprised they bought those Russian-made anti-aircraft missiles. Commercial deals have been done in the last couple of years. Do you agree with Alexei that this is just a beef between Turkey and Syria? It's not going to become one between Turkey and Russia?
No, I don't really agree. Of course, this agreement between Turkey and Russia is a strategic agreement, is of major importance. But each time Turkey was facing Syria governments, the Russians have to step up and to try to reorganize the agreement. Remember about the buffer zone. When the Turks arrived in the north of Syria, initially they wanted a very large zone. And after a negotiation with the Russians, they have just a small zone with Russian patrol on this around this zone. And I think that in Idlib, it's the same.
It's going to be the same. I want to pick up on this point. We have to take a very quick break. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're seeing how the push by pro-Assad forces to take the last rebel-held enclave in Syria, the northwestern Idlib province, has put those pro-Assad forces in direct confrontation with Turkey, which is part of a 2018 agreement, has soldiers in monitoring observation posts in the northwest. We're talking about it with retired General Dominique Trinquant, former head of the French military mission to the United Nations. From Istanbul, we're with Yusuf Arim, analyst and commentator for TRT World. Alexei Klebnikov joins us. He is the Middle East analyst for the Russian International Affairs Council in Moscow. And we're pleased to welcome Firas Abdullah, Syrian photojournalist. We'll talk about your experiences in one of those enclaves where a lot of the population then moved up to Idlib province a little bit later on, and the exhibit of photos that you're showing currently here in Paris at the 2nd Arrondissement Town Hall. Just before the break, General Trinquant saying it is an endgame what we're witnessing in Idlib, and there is at each stage of the game, you're saying so far, Russia and Turkey have managed to revise the script so that they could stay in lockstep. At what point does that become impossible?
I think on the last piece of game, it is very difficult because, as we know, all the fighters, the jihadist fighters, which are still in Idlib, have not been convinced to put their weapons out and to have a sort of agreement. So, and the Turkish government doesn't want to have these people coming into Turkey. So we've got the contradiction between the fact that the Russians are supporting the government of Bashar al Assad, who wants to have the control of all the territory, and the fact that the Turkish doesn't want these people to flee in Turkey. So this agreement, I'm talking about Idlib, is probably not the last one. The last one is the buffer zone, but it's a small agreement. But on Idlib, it's a major agreement, and there is a major difficulty for the Russian and for the Turks to understand each other and to have this observation post, because they are not a fighting position, they are only observation posts, and to move and to have the government of Bashar al-Assad taking control of this part of his country, of Syria.
Again, let's go over the timeline of the week. Monday was when there was that confrontation where there were both Turkish government forces and Syrian troops that were killed. Then on Tuesday, remember, Turkey's got Syria on its southern border. Across the Black Sea to the north, it's got Russia and Ukraine. Now, call it a coincidence of the calendar. Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Tuesday was in Kiev, where he publicly displayed his support for Ukraine's campaign to undo Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea.
Ukraine is expecting Turkey's help with the release of Ukrainian citizens, Crimean Tatars who are in illegal captivity in occupied Crimea and Russia.
I want to underline that Turkey does not recognize the illegitimate annexation of Crimea. Turkey supports Ukraine's territorial integrity, including Crimea.
Alexei Klebnikov, when the Kremlin hears those remarks from President Erdogan, is it a mild annoyance or a source of major concern to have him there standing alongside his Ukrainian counterpart?
Well, in the first place, if you look at the Russian-Turkish history, the history of relations between the two countries, it was quite rocky. The two countries had over 10, like about 13 or 14 wars between each other. The major thing both nations learned in recent decades is to compartmentalize their relations. Regardless having disagreements on a lot of issues, actually, including in Syria, the two chose to cooperate and focus on matters of joint interest, something which unites them more than diverge them apart. So I think that's important. And the rhetoric which is used in those kind of meetings by Erdogan or by Ukrainian president, that's I don't think that that can influence or affect in any way the substance, the essence of Russia-Turkish relations.
Yusuf Arim, you agree?
I do agree. Well, first, this was a pre-scheduled visit to the Ukraine, so it wasn't a surprise. And President Erdogan saying that he doesn't recognize the annexation of Crimea isn't anything new either. So it's a pre-scheduled visit, and basically a view of President Erdogan's repeated over and over. So it hasn't hurt the Turkey-Russia relationship up till now, and it won't. Now, there's been a lot of press going on talking about the Turkey-Russia relationship, saying there's cracks in it and it's coming to an end. It's not. Now, we have to differentiate between Turkey's bilateral relationship with Russia, which is excellent. We have these huge deals in place, whether it be the Turk Stream project, the S-400, the Akkuyu nuclear power plant. And these aren't type of deals that you make with a country that you have a come-and-go relationship with. These are long-term strategic deals that you basically lock in being an ally with for the next decade or two to come. And then we also need to differentiate the part of Turkey's relationship with Russia where they're competing interests in international theaters, whether it be Libya or Syria. Now, it's only right that each country is vying for their own national interests in these other countries. So there's going to be times when they come head to head. Now, when we look at Idlib, obviously, Turkey and Russia's partnership in Syria started with both of their desire to protect the territorial integrity of Syria. Now, with the fall of Daesh, with America being removed from the equation and downgrading their presence in the country, and the YPG's ambitions of autonomy slowly being shelved, the territorial integrity of Syria has been guaranteed almost. So comes the next big problem, which is Assad. Now, this is a place where both sides are divergent, and obviously we're starting to see glaring problems between the two.
But what we're also seeing, on that point, Yusuf Farim, what we're also seeing is columnists who are very pro-Erdogan, who have been very critical of the West. The last few days, they've been penning editorials calling on the United States and the European Union to side with Turkey against Russia.
Well, not to side with Turkey against Russia, but to help Turkey with this possible humanitarian disaster. Now, I was actually going to get to this. There's 500,000, 520,000, according to the United Nations, displaced people on the Turkish border. President Erdogan today said that's closer to 1 million, actually. So while our French general guest was saying that Idlib is an endgame, whatever outcome comes out of Idlib, we need to take into account the humanitarian aspect, and these migrants, they need a place to go, and that place is not Turkey, because Turkey already has 3.6 million people. Turkey's trying to relocate and repatriate some of these people. They're not going to take any more, and we can't let these people just sit there. So any solution inside Idlib must take into account these people, and if there is a solution that takes into account providing a safe place for these people, Turkey could be on board with that. So I think the next Putin-Erdogan meeting, which President Erdogan signaled today that after both delegations meet, there will be a meeting scheduled. I think that will be the main focus. What to do with the 3 million people inside Idlib, what to do with the people on the Turkish border. So once this is solved, both sides can hopefully get back to a political solution process. I think the most important question is, how much control does Russia have over Assad right now and his Idlib offensive? Is Assad going rogue against Moscow, or is Moscow really behind Assad with this offensive? I think that's a very important question that's going to change the dynamics of how Turkey's going to react to Russia and to the Assad regime.
All right, let's break down some of those points you've brought up. Firas Abdul, first of all, going back, can the Turkey-Russia relationship, can they compartmentalize it, as it were, and say, all right, Ukraine is one thing, Syria is another, Libya is a third?
Actually, first of all, I would like to mention that about convincing convincing the fighters who are inside to put their arms down. That means, okay, how we can convince these fighters to put their arms down while the regime and Russian air forces are making progress to kill the people who are there inside. So if the groups there put their arms down, so what will happen? What will happen is just what happened in 2012 when regime forces break down several cities and make massacres by white weapons.
You heard the prediction from Yusuf Farim, which there could be another Turkey-Russia agreement, this time to help with those 520,000 displaced people in the Northwest.
Yeah, but now we are talking about a problem that caused by one. We are talking about finding solution for a problem that caused by one of these parts who make this problem, which is Russia. They bombed the civilians, and now they are going to find a solution for these civilians who bombed their house and push them to the Turkish borders. It's not even logical. How we can find solution for people we make their problems? This is the question that.
All right. Again, we're up to more than 500,000 in Idlib and its surroundings. Many of them desperate, they say, to reach the Turkish border.
First, we fled to Samin near our town after heavy shelling hit our area. Then we fled to the city of Idlib, but there were no services. It wasn't safe, so we're fleeing to the Turkish border.
So where are they going to go, General Tranko?
That's exactly. I understand both points. In Ankara, the fact that the refugee have no place to go in Turkey, they don't want to have more refugee in Turkey. I understand perfectly the point. I understand also the point of the people who have been in the opposition of the current government in Syria for so many years. The problem is that we will not fight another war. I mean, that's the end of the war. I mean, Bashar al Assad has won the war, and so. You can say no, but you are here in France because you can't fight there. I mean, it's the point. They are with the help, of Russia and Iran. Don't forget Iran. They have conquered all city piece by piece, and so now it's the last city. So I agree, and I've got no solution about the fact that between Turkey and Russian and the Syrian government, they must discuss what to do with the people inside. But this is really, I mean, why it was not Idlib is as it is? Because in military terms, you can't take three cities at the same time. So you take one, take the second, and you take the third, and the third is there.
And the third is there. And to Yusuf Arim's question, over what the relationship is today between Moscow and Damascus? Are they still in lockstep then?
Well, I think it's very strong because, the fact that Russia has supported the government of Bashar al-Assad has changed many things. Has changed something very important, is the strategic position of Russia. Now everybody's talking with Russia. I mean, after what they've done and the fact that the Americans have partly left the Middle East, who are the people very important, who are powerful, are the Russian. And we see that after the Middle East, now Russia is coming into Africa, just to show that they've got a role to play.
But at this point in time, General Tankon, is Moscow in full agreement? Is it orchestrating or helping Assad with this offensive, or do they have diverging interests at this point?
No, I think they are helping, but they must be careful with Turkey. And they must be, there is a strategic agreement, as it was said, with Turkey. So at the end, there will be an agreement like there was an agreement in the buffer zone. But I've got no crystal ball, and I don't know what Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Putin will discuss about this agreement. But certainly, the end game is that the Russian government, since the start, have made the choice of supporting Bashar al-Assad. And the fact of supporting Bashar al-Assad is to reestablish his regime in Syria. Doesn't mean about him, but about the regime in Syria.
Is that a reality that people in Turkey accept, Yusuf Arim, that, well, Assad's regime is there to stay?
I don't know. That's a very interesting question, and I think many people do see Assad as securing his political survival for the near future. But well, one of the main things that I wanted to say is Assad needs to be very, very careful right now and not overstep, because this migrant issue and possible migrant crisis is a top foreign policy matter for Turkey. And I don't think he understands how important this is for Erdogan in being able to solve this issue. Pushing Turkey too much can bring Turkey to a position where it can really recommit back to Idlib. And recommitting to Idlib can take escalation domination away from Russia and Assad's hands and bring it into Turkey's hands, because this is a very important issue. And Assad can really risk many, many things by allowing Turkey to escalate.
Does Turkey have the means militarily to do that when they're already on the...
Yes, Turkey does have...
When they're already on that northeastern front in Syria?
Turkey has already been amassing troops near the border in Idlib, preparing, if it needs to increase its presence in that region. But also, a further escalation can reinvigorate the Syrian opposition to take up arms against Assad, not just in Idlib, in other areas. It can re-internationalize the whole Idlib affair. We're one tweet away from Trump saying, you know what? Turkey's by themselves right now. They're getting cornered in there with Russia. U.S. has an Incirlik air base. Brussels can commit, maybe not soldiers, but Brussels can commit diplomatically. So the last thing Assad wants is to re-internationalize Syria when there's only really three players left, Turkey, Iran, and Russia. And these three players can actually sit down at the table, compartmentalize problems, and try to talk things out. So he has to be very, very careful with the way he handles Turkey's position in Idlib, because definitely do not underestimate how important this migrant crisis is for Turkey. This is something that President Erdogan is not going to allow.
Do you agree with that, that you could see NATO members rallying around Turkey?
No, I don't see that. Turkey has been very difficult for NATO until now. They are still part of NATO, but in a very difficult position. That's the first point. Second point is that the Turkish army invading or fighting into Syria, the last time they did it on the buffer zone, in fact, they were using very few Turkish soldiers, but mainly Syrian fighters. And I guess that in Idlib they will do the same. Because I'm not sure that inside Turkey the people are supporting an action of the Turkish army outside the border. But really the case, and our counterpart in Ankara is right. The problem of the refugee is a major problem for Turkey, and that must be dealt with Syria and with the Russian.
So we may be at an end game. We may be at a turning point. At this point in time, Firas Abdullah, maybe we could call up some of the photos that you took between 2013 and 2018 when Ghouta, this suburb of Damascus, was a rebel enclave before that negotiation that we described in part one of our discussion, where many moved to talk us. Some of them moved to Idlib. You came abroad. Tell us about this picture, for instance, here.
Yeah. Actually, I've taken this picture in August 2015. 13 August 2013, there was an airstrike. 2015, the airstrike by regime air forces targeted the main market in Douma city. 150 people were killed and over 300 injuries in that day. It's the main public market in Douma city. It was filmed by the Russian drones. It was filmed, people heard drones. I was there, I heard the drones in the sky. And because that makes sure that they know exactly what they are targeting. So they saw the crowd, it was crowded, and they exactly targeted the market to kill 150 people.
It was on purpose?
Yeah, it was the main target for them. It has been always the main target, civilians for Russia.
All right, and this week when we heard the story about the bakery that had been hit, again, in Idlib province, your thoughts on that, as reported by the monitoring groups, that a bakery had been hit and civilians killed. Again, Russia blamed for that one.
I haven't heard about this news, but I've seen bakeries in our neighborhoods were targeted because people were in line waiting for their
for the bread.
Breads, yeah. Exactly.
Wow. Let's play another one of those images that again are on display at the town hall of Paris's second arrondissement. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, this is also the morning of 23 of August 2015. Also, I was that morning. I was just walking the city, and I heard that the airplane get down from the sky and hit a neighborhood just in front of me. And I just ran there into the smoke to see what's happening, to documenting what's happening there. And I saw this man. He's holding two children. I don't know if they are his children or not, but they were shocked like this. They were exactly like this. They didn't move. I didn't take this picture in recent situation. No, they were just like this, looking shocked, and they don't know what's happening around them.
And this was in 2015, 3 years before the final siege of Ghouta.
Yeah, because the final siege in Ghouta started in 2017, ends in April 2018 with displacing over 70,000 people to Idlib.
Let's maybe show one last one here from that series of pictures.
Yeah, actually, this is my neighborhood. It was targeted by Russian airstrike. This is also in 2015, in November 2015, while we were searching about the body of one civilian was killed there. The warplanes was just turning around in the sky, take ready for make another hit. And in that day, we lost one child of our neighborhood. It was just disappeared. So because the missile was hit just in front of him.
So you hear General Trinquant talk about how when you look militarily, Assad has won. When you look at this picture, people don't forget a day like this.
No.
So what happens in the long run to Syria?
This is why I'm saying Assad will not win, and he didn't win because actually the end of the opposition, when Assad said that it's the end of the revolution, it's the end of him, because the situation will not get calm. People will still remember. People were still thinking about a revolution. People they break the wall of silence since long time. So they will continue what they have started since for 9 years.
General Trinquant?
I've just seen so many pictures of war like that when in different places of the world. And after 4 or 5 years of war, either the people are fleeing, going away, or they just keep silence because they are fed up about the war. That doesn't mean that they are not in opposition of the regime. That means only that they understand that with weapons they will not change the regime. And they've got no choice. And that's very sad, but that's the reality.
All right, maybe we have time for one last of those pictures that you took before coming here to France.
Yeah. This is the last picture that I've taken in my city just before leaving. It was in 30 March 2018. This is the last movement of the shutter of my camera. Then I get the bus and went out to north of Idlib. This is how my neighborhood looks like. If you can see there the barrels, if you just step one step after this barrels, you will be bombed by the regime army, who they are on the mountain just in front of the neighborhood. So the snipers were.
And do you have news of your neighborhood? Do you have news of the old neighborhood today?
Actually, it's very hard to have news from there, because if someone from there called me or called someone who went out, he will be arrested and maybe tortured under death because he contacted someone who is opposition, was considered for the regime forces as a terrorist.
We'll leave it there. Again, Firas Abdullah, your exhibit is on display till the 20th of February at the second Arrondissement Town Hall here in Paris. Thanks for being with us. I want to thank Yusuf Farim for being with us from Istanbul. We welcomed Alexei Klebnikov from Moscow. Dominique Trinquant, thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.